Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Be Here Now, a special online conversation with Andy Burnham, Mayor of Greater Manchester. So this event is part of the Urban Transport Next series of conversations, which features a live online audience on the topics that will help shape the future of urban transport. These conversations are hosted by Urban Transport Group, which is the UK's network of city region transport authorities, of which Transport for Greater Manchester is a member. The Urban Transport Group's job is to ensure transport can play its full part in making our city regions greener, fairer, happier, healthier, and more prosperous. It sounds good to me. So I'm Laura Laker, a journalist who specialises in active travel and urban transport, and I am delighted to be speaking today with Andy Burnham. Before we start, there will be an opportunity for the audience to pose some questions, so you can stick those in the Zoom question box and they will be picked up towards the end of the conversation. You can also join the conversation on Twitter using the handle @UTG_UK and the hashtag UTGNext. That's all the social stuff. And without further ado, welcome Andy Burnham.
Thanks very much, Laura. And can I just say thank you to everybody for tuning in. It's great that you've given us a bit of your time. These are exciting times for public transport in Greater Manchester, but it's great, obviously, to get your feedback and suggestions about what more we might do. So just sorry to say that, Laura, at the start.
Of course, great. Yeah, great. It's great that you're excited about them. There is a lot of exciting stuff happening in Manchester, and of course your devolution deal, which we'll get on to. But I think we wanted to start with getting to know you a bit. You've been Mayor of Greater Manchester since 2017, and you, like Sadiq Khan, have decided to run for a third term. And I just wonder sort of what makes this job like still exciting for you, and you feel that you've still got something to do?
I don't know if it comes over, but I love it. I love the job in a way that I never kind of felt I could fully be myself in Westminster. I do feel you can be yourself in this job. I do think people have kind of probably seen the real me a little bit more. And the reason being, it's obviously a kind of place-based role. And, it's place first rather than party first. And the thing about that is it just frees you up to operate in a very different way. And you can really then sort of speak to the kind of pride that people have in this place, in this great city where I am speaking to you from now. And when you start to then think about improvements, it's just such a rewarding thing. I know people here deserve better transport. And when you're kind of on the cusp of delivering some improvements, it's just a brilliant thing. It really matters to people. It makes a difference to people's lives. It's kind of more tangible, perhaps, than some of the things that you can do in Westminster. So, yeah, I love the role. It's got a sort of symmetry for me as well, Laura, in terms of my life coming full circle, because I can remember very well as a teenager the cherished orange and white buses of Greater Manchester, GM buses, being taken away or taken off us, and something else coming in that was much more expensive and not as good. So kind of being in the position to sort of, then bring that back to a better system, it's a bit like life coming full circle for me.
Yeah, and because there were 830 services being run by 30 operators using 150 ticket types or something, and it was £4 for a single journey compared with 155 in London. So there's a huge difference. And I wonder what your kind of experience of travelling in Greater Manchester by public transport is, and even walking and cycling.
Yeah, so I always have been actually a public transport user. And it's, if I'm honest, it's frustrating at times. Where I live in Greater Manchester is just on the edge, towards the edge anyway, in the Wigan Borough. So I live in a place called Golborne. I would catch a train ordinarily, and I do catch a train a lot from Newton-le-Willows, which is just outside Greater Manchester, but that would be my route into work. And so, yeah, it's been a hard one in recent times. The trains have not been where they should be for all of the years that I've been mayor, and that's challenging at times, frustrating. More time is spent travelling than should be spent. That said, there are really good parts of our public transport system. So The tram system I'm really proud of. It works really well, and because of the nature of it, is an easy to use system at street level. So in some ways you could say public transport in Greater Manchester has some of the best bits of public transport in the country, but sadly also some of the worst. And it's the lack of join up, I think, that makes kind of commuting by only public transport something of a frustrating experience for our residents. However, you speak to me in a good week, Laura, because we will be making a major announcement on Friday about a new fare structure for Greater Manchester that is bus and tram integrated. So yeah, things are changing. They're changing quickly now as we head towards the start of the B network in September.
Can you tell us a bit more about that? Is it going to be a sort of one card tap in, tap out system?
So ultimately, we're going to get to by the sort of point where we have the full B network, which will be on the 5th of January 2025. I'm always very specific because I always want TFGM to know that I know the dates and I'm holding everybody to the dates, and all the operators as well. But that is the day when we will have completed the re-regulation of buses. And then there will be full integration with trams at that point from a ticketing point of view. So at that point, it will be a tap in, tap out system with a daily cap on what people can spend. So on the London model. But what I will announce on Friday is an interim solution for the, what is it now? Sort of 18 months or so before we get to that full point. So we'll be moving towards an integrated range of tickets that people will be able to use, which will actually cut the cost of public transport quite significantly in Greater Manchester.
So more like the kind of Oyster, move towards more like the Oyster system in London.
More like that. These will be products that could be purchased via the B Network app when it launches. So, but not, if you like, a sort of not with a situation where people can build up to the cap. If you understand what I'm saying, you'd have to buy it at the price rather than have a cap system. But that's where we're heading to. We're heading to a London model.
Right. You had it here first.
Yeah.
So it's still a ticket for now, but it's you're building up to
it. For now. Yeah, but it is very much interim, and we are going to be in a sort of a kind of halfway house position for the next couple of years. So I think people will have to be a little patient with us. So the B Network, as I say, will launch in September. On Friday, we will also set out plans for the next stage, tranche 2. So it's the second part of the city region to be franchised, and that process will conclude in March 24. So. And then finally in early 2025 in the south of the city region. So that's the process that we're on now, and it will be a slightly mixed picture. There'll be a lot of yellow around, but won't be completely yellow until early in the new year. I think we should suddenly ask Coldplay for use of their song, shouldn't we? It's all yellow. I think that's definitely going to be the catchphrase.
Where are they based? You could get them on top of one of the buses if you've got an open top one.
Good idea. I was actually thinking, though, just to bring the B Network to life, I was wondering whether I might get Liam Gallagher to do the next stop announcements. I think that would be a pretty unique thing, wouldn't it?
You would do that. I mean, I don't know him, but why wouldn't you?
He'd really get his, Pomona. When he'd really be able to get his lips around some of the names on the tram stops.
If he's listening, then he knows where to find you.
He does. There's a gig waiting for him right there.
Amazing. So I remember when you had Chris Boardman as your cycling and walking commissioner originally, and you launched the B Network, and at the time it was the Walking and Cycling Network.
Yeah.
And I wonder if how that kind of came to be, and how was it your intention at the start to incorporate all public transport within that system? Did that come later?
Well, I'm glad you've mentioned Chris, because Chris was huge actually in the development of our thinking. with relation to the B network. He first proposed it for just the cycling and walking element. I think we originally thought B lines, and then, but anyway, complicated reasons.
The name changed, yeah.
Came the B network. But what Chris did, I think people weren't expected when he came in that he would just be about cycling and quite a, sort of narrow focus. But Chris was always really clear that he wanted to sort of put active travel at the heart of a system that was about moving differently, moving in better ways, and very much focused on the average kind of 12-year-old, or or a mum with a double buggy. So he at the start of the active travel B network, Chris was very much about how everyday people living their lives, and you just facilitate different movement. But he started to sort of develop his thinking. So, well, we need to make this sort of first mile, last mile, and then better public transport in the middle. So that's how our kind of thinking developed. And at the last mayoral election, I asked Chris to take on a bigger role with regard to kind of transport more broadly. And he then helped me bring this concept of the B network into being. So yeah, I definitely would want to pay tribute to Chris here today, because we've really sort of gone from a place where it was a very fragmented, difficult picture when I arrived in 2017, and we've gone from there to having what I would say is quite a compelling and clear vision for transport in the city region, which when you add trains into the mix, as we hope to do by the end of the decade, you will have a model of public transport outside of London that I think will be the envy of a lot of other places.
Yeah, and of course, because I think quite often in the UK we think about transport in quite siloed way, and forgetting that actually you need to be able to get to the bus and the train stations, and so those walking and cycling journeys are incredibly important if we're sort of trying to reduce.
Massively so. I think transport, does need to kind of reflect on this as a sort of sector. It's too siloed, in my experience. And I think that's just the way transport in England has been, isn't it? People have one kind of focus, be it bus or rail, and it needs to be more of a place focus. Transport needs to think place first, much more. Transport is there to support places. It's not there for its own sake, is it? It's there to, bring a place to life and to support the workings of a place. And yet it really often doesn't think in a place-based way. And in a joined up way between the different sectors. And even within, even within rail, it can be too siloed, because, very project focused and, not seeing the bigger picture sometimes. So I was very big in calling for integration of health and social care when I was the health secretary, and kind of making sure that, people understand the interdependencies between different parts of systems. I think transport needs to go on its own integration journey, and it needs to become much more thinking holistically about transport at the first opportunity, rather than the different roads, rail, light rail, all of that. So I hope what we're doing in Greater Manchester might develop some of that thinking and that different way of approaching it.
Yeah, and we'll come on to your Trailblazer devolution deal, and I think that also applies to housing and new development.
Yeah, it definitely does. I think we need something of the Dutch mentality, don't we? I think the Dutch have always had a really clear kind of multimodal kind of approach, integration at the heart of everything, and then how that then supports strong places and opens up opportunity to regenerate places. You're absolutely right. We need to start thinking now about zero carbon public transport linked to zero carbon homes in the heart of some of the towns that have felt neglected in the past. How do we really then sort of take a vision of the future to places that need support? And what I notice in Greater Manchester is its regeneration is so obviously linked to transport. The places with the best transport links are the ones that are much hotter from a property and regeneration point of view. And so the B network, hopefully, the beauty of it, if it really works, is that effectively everywhere is better connected immediately. And therefore the regeneration potential of transport would be felt in many, many more places almost overnight.
Yeah. And perhaps we'll come on to the Trailblazer devolution deal now, because Manchester and Greater Manchester, I should say, and the West Midlands are the two regions that are getting this kind of Trailblazer devolution deal. And part of that is about the fact that actually with comparable cities in Europe, Greater Manchester is not performing economically in the way that its counterparts do. And transport is part of that. And obviously transport is not the only part of this deal, but could you just sort of tell us what the deal means for Greater Manchester and specifically for transport?
Yeah, I think just on our performance, economic performance, you're absolutely right, Laura, to say that compared to other second cities, counterpart cities. Sorry, Andy Street. I think we've got that crown and we've taken it off you.
Birmingham, Manchester, face off.
Always. Actually, we got on very well, but I think what's going on here at the moment is really quite something in terms of the UK context. We are growing faster than the UK economy here. The skyline of Manchester has changed dramatically, actually, in recent times. So, yeah, there's loads of good things happening. But you're right, we need to go to the next level as a major city region on a more international scale. And the Trailblazer will help us. So, in terms of transport, the main thing that I was keen to land in it is the ability to create what I would call TFGM overground, or to mirror TfL overground in London, or B network overground, bringing obvious commuter lines into our integrated system, even if they originate slightly outside Greater Manchester. If they're a line that is serving the Greater Manchester commuter economy, that we would be able to have them B network branded, obviously, hopefully co-run or with ourselves with an influence over services as well, but very much part of the ticketing system. So let's say if you live in Buxton and you currently commute from there on that line into Greater Manchester, when you tap in Buxton, you'll be tapping into the Greater Manchester capped system. So that is more a vision for the second half of this decade, a 2025 to 2030 vision. But we will be saying more about that on Friday as well, actually. We've been working closely with Network Rail on that. And, after a lot, as I say, a lot of kind of sense of railways here being in decline, it's nice to be able to start talking about a positive vision for the railways. It would be very risky, actually, for the railway industry to see an integrated B network system build up in terms of bikes, bus and tram, and then the rail sector to be outside of it, because I think it would, it would look like an outlier, wouldn't it? So it's really important that we get a strong B network offer from the rail industry, and we're very much working on that now.
Yeah, and I know that you've been very unhappy at times with the rail, the performance of the rail in and around Manchester.
Yeah, that's probably an understatement, I think, Laura. You're being very diplomatic there. Well, it's just not been anywhere near good enough. Let's just say it as it is. It's been appalling, frankly, at times. The damage to people's lives, businesses, has been significant. And hopefully, as I say, we're coming through that period. It was very good news that TransPennine Express, under operator of last resort, signed a rest day working agreement with ASLEF last week. I think that went a little bit under the radar in terms of the news, but from our point of view, that's a really positive development. Northern Trains were the story going back a few years, but they've got progressively better in recent times. So we hope the same now will happen with TPE. Obviously, Avanti West Coast. Better, but I would say not good enough still. I don't think the standard of customer service is anything like it should be. The journey between London and as I say, the second city should be an easy one, a seamless one. And it isn't still. So definite work to be done. But I do think now that the rail industry, finally, you can see how it might come into a better place. And I'm really glad actually that with both of our main operators under operator of last resort, we do have a chance now to reshape the railway of the north of England. I've recently taken on the chair of the Rail North Committee. And so, I'm not just, my purpose is not just to whinge at the industry or hold them to account, which I do have to do, but actually now to start saying, well, come on, let's shape this thing and make it work better for the north of England. So maybe we're moving into a more positive phase, and certainly not before time. And
of course, part of the solution, part of the problem you're trying to solve is one of air quality. I know the charging zone was a saga in Greater Manchester, and that's now a non-charging clean air zone. And I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about the approach to improving air quality and how it differs from approaches taken elsewhere, and whether it goes far enough.
Yeah, that's been a difficult debate, as people might know. So it's currently actually on hold because we have argued for a non-charging zone, and the government still wants us to model a charging clean air zone based on.
How does that work in practice, a non-charging zone?
Well, it would be a scheme based on incentives. So if you were to monitor the areas where there are exceedances, and the vehicles that are going through those areas and are contributing, you would obviously then target some incentives at the people who were in many ways causing the issue.
Snappage schemes in Coventry, they had the mobility credit that you could switch in your car for, say, bus passes or cycle hire.
We had some funding, but it just wasn't enough because the cost of compliant vehicles has increased significantly post-pandemic. So has the waiting time for them. And we were just clear, myself and the 10 leaders, that it wouldn't have actually worked because it would have just hit people with the charges. People wouldn't have been able to change vehicles because they either couldn't afford them or couldn't get them. And hence we asked for it to go under review. When you ask me about what our approach would be, personally, I think the B network will do more to improve air quality than any clean air zone would have done, because obviously if you get more people using public transport, you're dealing with particulates as well, not just nitrogen dioxide. We have a huge number of electric buses on order at Alexander Dennis in Falkirk. I went up to see them myself recently. The change to our buses is going to be quite spectacular, really, in terms of the rollout of franchising. So I think that will do a lot to deal with air pollution in our boroughs, actually. So there's at least 50, but probably a lot more electric buses going into service in Wigan and Bolton in September, overnight. And that will do a lot to improve air quality in that borough. But also, obviously, if people are using public transport more rather than driving, that will also have an impact on the level of particulates in the air. Yeah. So that's where I just to make a sort of broader point, if I could, Laura, I would worry about kind of an approach to net zero where we're kind of almost whacking people with a big stick to try and get us there.
I was going to ask you about the stick element, actually, because it seems to be the kind of carrot approach.
Well, I think it's going to be problematic if that's how we're going to try and get to net zero as a country, because kind of hearts and minds won't be with it. People will kind of see it as a new sort of kind of new form of unfairness, won't they? Particularly people on lower incomes. And I think it's much better to give people positive reasons to do the right thing. So, for instance, give them a higher standard public transport system that is and will be decarbonised over time. And lower cost public transport, and then say to people, right, please use this rather than use your car. That's a better way, I think, of doing this rather than just hitting people with charges.
Of course, a broader picture, similar picture is that of climate change, which is obviously an enormous and pressing challenge for all of us. You've done a lot to encourage active travel and public transport use. Do you think it's possible to reach the target of half of all journeys by foot, bike, or public transport by 2040?
I think it's possible for certain, and the reason why I say it's possible is because when I look at people of my kids' generation, I don't think they are kind of planning life with a car, owning a car. I think they would prefer not to have one if they could have transport of a good enough standard to support a lifestyle without a car. So I kind of feel that's the opportunity to get to that figure. And if we can get transport right here in Greater Manchester, as I'm confident we will, this will be a public transport system that will be kind of really easy to use. This is not an anti-London point, but obviously the underground is sometimes not so easy to use, not so nice to use in the summer with the heat, etc. If you think of our trams, when they're integrated with the buses, and it's a quite cost-effective way of travelling. It's also quite a pleasant way of travelling around as well, because it's easy and it's less, less crowded and less hot at some times of the year. So, I think we can do it, but it's all about just getting that offer right and starting to create a network here. We are franchising the existing bus network to begin with, but when we can begin to change it and create situations where the buses start to support the tram, i.e., deliver people to get off a bus and get on a tram and integrate the timetable in that way, that's when I think we'll really see the benefits of our system coming through, and we will, I think, we will still be able to reach that challenging target that you mentioned.
Yeah. Okay. And so, kind of looking towards the future, next year is obviously a big year. It's going to be a big year for you, and also Sadiq Khan in London, both running for a third term, and also likely a general election. What is your priority going to be, and what would you like to see from a future government?
So transport will be the priority going into that election, because, as you heard earlier, we will be in the middle of bringing in the B network at the 2024 mayoral election. So I will very much be asking the public to give me the backing to finish the job, basically. And that means that the election is quite crucial, really, in that respect. That I expect there'll be other candidates who are taking a sort of reverse view. There's some people who criticise the decision that we've made, and there'll be a debate about public transport, no doubt, at the next election. Some people also querying net zero and the direction of travel there. So I'll be ready to have that debate, but I'll be ready to proudly defend what we've done and what we are doing. And I think in a helpful way, possibly, to get onto the second part of your question, the mayoral elections of May 24 might help make public transport an issue at the general election. I think there are lots of votes to be won in this issue. If you come forward with simple policies about cutting fares, look at the cost of public transport in the rest of Europe. It's unbelievably better value than it is here. We are paying high fares for often a poor or patchy service. And the party that commits to really bringing down those fares and improving services, I think, gets a big thumbs up from the public. They want more focus on this issue. That's what I've always found as mayor, actually, whenever I've spoken about it. People are engaged on transport because it affects their lives every single day, possibly unlike pretty much every other policy area. But it's kind of striking how little it features in the Whitehall and Westminster debate. I think because obviously they all travel to work on the London transport system. They think, oh, this is fine, it's quite affordable, it's all right, isn't it? But I don't think there's enough recognition out of London what most people go through on a daily basis when it comes to commuting. So I hope that public transport might be a bigger issue at the general election. In terms of what I want from the commitments in manifestos or from a future government, there has to be a commitment to revenue support for transport outside of London, ongoing revenue support to get those fares to a level where we can make it much more affordable. I would like them to commit, as I think the Labour Party have, to allowing bus franchising everywhere. I think it should be allowed even in non-mayoral combined authority areas. I would like to see the commitment to not just public ownership of the railway system, but also, a model of devolution within rail that will really support our ambitions as well. So, and while I'm at it, more investment in rail infrastructure in city centre Manchester, and in particular, an underground station at Manchester Piccadilly supporting Northern Powerhouse Rail and HS2. So there's quite a long shopping list there already, isn't there?
They're going to need some funding. Because I think there's this sense that in the UK that unlike health or education, that somehow transport has to pay for itself, that it has to sort of come on a commercial model. And I know where I grew up in rural Somerset, the bus fares have just gone up and up and up, and they're kind of reduced at the moment, but it's a temporary basis, and it's just astonishing.
Honestly, Laura, I mean, that we need to break out of that mentality. And the reason why we need to break out of that mentality is because transport is the prerequisite for regional growth, isn't it? You need a good functioning public transport system to get that uplift in productivity, the growth in the economy that you want to see. As I was saying before, you can't get it without it, as far as I can see. So if we've got the government and in fact, the opposition both rightly saying they want growth, you can't say that without kind of also accepting that the kind of complete foundation for a growing economy is a functioning public transport system that people can afford to use. And that means finding public money to support public transport and seeing it as an investment in a growing economy. So you're absolutely right. We need to change the mindset in Whitehall of how they view transport as a policy and how the Treasury views transport. I don't believe the Treasury at all has got its thinking right on transport. It is clear to me that if you want to stimulate growth in all parts of the country, you have to make transport much better and more affordable. This kind of short-sighted approach of just saying, well, we want to give money to health or education, so we'll starve transport. Well, that does not get you to the right place when it comes to a productive economy.
Yeah, and it's kind of more of the siloed thinking that we spoke about early on. And I guess lots of people are going to be here in this today, listen to this conversation because they care about transport and kind of understand its power. And I care about it because of that as well, because it really is so far-reaching. And
I agree. And though I never was a transport minister, I'll let you into a little secret here. I once did a job not dissimilar to yours, because I started out. Well, my very first job after leaving university was on the Middleton Guardian, but it was as an unpaid job as a reporter. I couldn't last in that for long. So my next job was to work on some transport magazines, one of them being Passenger Rail Management, the exciting, I think, short-lived title. I'm not sure it's still in circulation. So I kind of started my career a little bit in transport, and I mentioned the Dutch before because I did travel a lot around Holland and looked at what they were doing, and it just seemed to me then light years ahead of what we were doing. This was the mid-90s, and I did fear that privatisation of rail in the UK was going to take us in the wrong direction, and my view is that it has done. So I have always had a kind of a feel for transport and a bit of policy knowledge around it, and I've kind of had always this sense that we got fundamentally trapped in the wrong place with, a kind of unaccountable, fragmented, overpriced system, and hopefully now we can turn that around and bring it back to where it always should have been. Mm. The reason why I don't mention it very often is because Have I Got News for You often invite me on. They must have invited me on 10 times, and I'm certain it's because they've got some of my old articles from Passenger Rail Management. And I'm sure they would make it guest publication of the week if I.
Oh yeah, where they block out bits and.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't deal with the embarrassment of it. So.
Yeah, they don't give people an easy time on there, do they?
No.
And you've got Ian Hislop. I've got one final question, but I might leave it till after the audience questions, and we've got some good ones. So I might.
No worries.
I might ask because also they're quite relevant to what we were just talking about. So we have one question to the well-made points about transport needing to think holistically. Will the GMCA, that's the Greater Manchester Combined Authority, be pushing for suitable changes to the spatial planning system? This person's asking because the primary legislation going through currently brings opportunities for spatial planning to be refreshed, play a much more helpful role in decarbonising transport. So that was a long question with some explanation.
Yeah, it's a good question. We are about, hopefully, to sign off what will be the largest spatial plan ever produced in England, which was called Greater Manchester Spatial Framework and is now called Places for Everyone. It involves 9 of our 10 authorities. And I can just assure the person that's asked the question, we are very much linking that spatial plan to our transport plan. So we have places across our city region that we now are prioritising for regeneration and investment. One major site being up in the north of Greater Manchester called Atom Valley, which is a huge strategic site linking Bury, Oldham and Rochdale, where we have high ambitions for advanced manufacturing and advanced materials on the site, linking to the University of Manchester and graphene and all of that stuff. But we're really clear that there has to be a high quality. If it's to work, it can't be a car-only site. It has to have, even though it's on the M60, it has to have high-quality public transport going through. So I just want to assure the question, because we've done a spatial plan, I think we are now in the place where we can think very strategically about the transport to support that spatial plan. And I would definitely recommend that as a way to go.
Okay, thank you. Next question is, I wondered what sorts of opportunities you see for using bus franchising and transport devolution to strengthen transport connections across regional borders. For example, for people travelling from Goulburn to Newton-le-Willows.
Helpful example. I normally walk it, actually. and I'm serious about that. I do. But anyway, that's just me. Yeah, Steve Rotherham and I are talking a lot about this. So Steve, Mayor of the Liverpool City Region, a great friend of mine, as people know, he is looking at franchising as well. I think they've just started their consultation on it. So I think within 5 years, it's possible to see a franchise system in both of the city regions. And we would absolutely want to collaborate on, the fare system, for instance, but also the services that are, those crucial cross-border services. In the short term, we will have a permit scheme for cross-border services. So any operators that are running, cross-border services will need to apply to TfGM for a permit to run a service alongside the B network. But in the long run, you could see a very much more integrated offer between Greater Manchester and the Liverpool City region, and actually possibly some new types of services, guided bus down the East Lancs, or that type of thing, or maybe on motorway. So rapid bus transit between the two cities. So Steve and I are talking a lot about those things. But for the short term, there'll be a permit scheme to support cross-border services.
Okay, so the Newton-le-Willows person is going to be happy. So building on that cross-border transport question, is there a risk that devolution deals in different city regions make transport less integrated rather than more, especially cross-border?
Yeah, I think I can see where the question is coming from, because different places do different things, and then it's quite confusing for people. Yeah, I think there's a risk of that, but we've always been aware as mayors that there are risks of our policies being confusing or contradictory. And for that reason, we collaborate as mayors much more than we compete. So Tracy Brabin, Mayor of West Yorkshire, chairs the M10, and she chairs it brilliantly. And that is a forum really for open dialogue about all of the things that we're doing together. And often we try and be complementary in what we do. It's in a different policy area, but I'll give you an example. We've got a Greater Manchester Good Employment Charter, which is about improving jobs. Steve has introduced a fair employment charter, but it's basically the same thing because we've collaborated. We've changed the name, but it's the same thing because we're conscious that we can't do one thing once, and a business that's operating in both says, "Oh, I'm being asked to do this here and that there." So that, I think, should give some reassurance that we do think these things through. And transport reform, absolutely, along that M62 corridor, as the 3 city regions change things, as we all are, we will want to make sure it joins up at the borders.
Yeah, and of course, it makes sense to collaborate. Then you're not kind of replicating the same work, and you can get more done.
I think the truth of the matter is, when we've gone through our franchising process, some of the people who've worked on it here, no doubt, will support Liverpool City Region and West Yorkshire as they look to do similar, and that should probably bring a sort of complementary approach.
And we have a question about gender equality in transport. There are lots of studies that show the transport system works better for men than for women. Buses is a great example because I think women take more buses, and obviously the price of them has gone up quite a lot. Men drive more and they're cheaper. Cycling is also an example. Many more men than women cycle. So as part of your package of transport improvements, do you think it would be a good idea to do some work that specifically ensures all improvements benefits men and women equally? I guess it's a question about equity.
Yeah, no, it's a really important question. And I think the biggest thing I would point to in relation to usage of public transport and levels of active travel participation amongst the differences between men and women, safety, I think, would be the biggest issue that might lie behind those differences. So obviously the segregated cycling and wheeling lanes that we're developing are really designed to give people that lift in confidence about safety from an active travel point of view. And Dame Sarah Story is just doing a tremendous job for us in really building out that original B network, and work continues apace on that. When it comes to safety on public transport, on buses and trams, I think we need to up our game there. We recognise that. So we've recently agreed with the Chief Constable of Greater Manchester Police that the public transport system in Greater Manchester will be considered the 11th district of the city region for policing purposes, to have its own structure and its own focus. The new chief and his deputy have really upped the numbers of people in our transport unit in Greater Manchester Police, and absolutely we want to make it easier for people to kind of report things on public transport via the B Network app. We want to make sure that there's a stronger presence on the system from both GMP and our travel safe officers. So there's quite a lot of thought going into that, and we recognise it's a serious issue that deserves more attention than it's perhaps had in the past.
Yeah, great. So we've got a couple of minutes left. We wanted to ask you a fun question. We know you're a big music fan, and I think there's a nice article, I think, in the Times recently about you and your last gig before lockdown. But we were just wondering what 3 songs would be on your playlist for a long train journey.
Well, if it's a train journey,
given
the state of them, I think it would have to be "Heaven Knows I'm Miserable Now," wouldn't it? or "Blue Monday." Yeah, something like that. I absolutely never get on a train without my AirPods, because you need something to distract you. I don't wish to always have a downer on the rail industry, and I definitely feel we're moving into a better place with them, actually. So, but let's hope so. But I hope they will. Anyone on the call from the rail industry, probably don't take it too personally, and also, I think you can understand why it's not been the best of times for us. But
yeah, you need to try and do a bit better.
Need to do.
Thank you, Andy. A big thank you to the Mayor of Greater Manchester for lending your time. Thanks so much for being here. Be here now. So the Urban Transport Group, before we go, there will be more online conversations. So keep an eye out for those. But until then, thanks to everyone who joined the conversation. Thank you again, Andy Burnham. And
no problem. Thanks to the Urban Transport Group. It's great to see policy discussions like this taking place, actually. And I think we need to work with you and all of the members on this call to make transport that issue, public transport and its funding, that issue at the next general election. So if we could agree on that today, Laura, I think that'd be a good point of progress on which to finish.